Hi, Liberators. This is Tiffany Coleman, and it's another episode of Interesting People. Today, I have the fabulous Dr. Jessica Young Brown with me today, and today's episode is titled "Get Your Mind Right" because I wanted us to have a discussion about therapy and what it's all about, how it helps, things we can possibly do to help get ourselves together, and then just to kind of destigmatize what therapy is and what it's all about. I thought that she is the perfect person to open up and have this discussion with. If you are a loyal follower of this podcast, you will recognize her from a previous episode when we did mental health and clergy and COVID-19. And she was a valuable asset there. And I wanted her to come back on the show and just talk about mental health as a subject. So before we get in, I just want to introduce to some and present to others the fabulous Dr. Jessica Young Brown. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into it, to the meat of the topic. So just in a very general definition, what is mental health? What does it mean to be mentally healthy?
Sure. So for me, number one, we all have mental health, and it's something we all need to attend to,
For
right?
sure.
But for me, it incorporates a couple of components. One is understanding and managing our emotions.
Okay.
The other is understanding and managing our stress to have healthy and fulfilling relationships, and to have a healthy sense of self-concept, or self-esteem, identity, kind of all those things.
For sure.
So for me, those are the four major components of mental health. And typically people who are able to manage those four areas well enjoy mental stability. That is not to say we don't get stressed or have emotional moments, but generally we feel like we can cope with the things that life throws at us.
Okay. So if someone, let's just say one day I just am overwhelmed and I just can't handle it, and I may even cry a little bit, does that mean that my mental health is just completely off?
No, it means you're a human being, right? So I tell people all the time, everybody has symptoms. Everybody gets stressed sometimes. Everybody gets anxious sometimes. Everybody gets sad sometimes. That doesn't mean you have a mental illness. It means you're a human being and you have feelings.
Okay.
Right? When we get to the point where we would say somebody has poor mental health, it would mean that in the grand scheme of their life, they don't feel like their life is manageable. They don't feel like they're able to cope, and things have gotten to the point where they kind of feel out of control. So all of us have those kind of temporary periods where we don't feel well. That's just us being a human being. But if it's something that's extended, or it really gets in the way with having the life we want to lead, then that's something that we would look at in terms of maybe needing some intervention.
So then that's a perfect segue into what would some of the signs and symptoms, if you can call them symptoms, that we can look for, or that if we see, we need to, say, hey, either I need to go check in, or I need to figure out a way to get my friend or my loved one checked out, or have them talk to somebody. What are some of the markers or flags that we should look for?
Sure. So one, if you feel really bad and it doesn't go away, sign one, right? So we are the experts on our own experience. And so if you have a sense like something isn't right, or I just don't feel like myself, or I just don't feel good, go see somebody. Two, if you have the sense that there are things that you want to accomplish in your life, or that you are normally able to complete, and those things are not being done. Let's say you're consistently running into trouble at work. You're having conflicts in all your relationships. You're in school and you just can't get your schoolwork done. Again, if you're unable to just kind of manage the daily activities of your life, that's a sign you might need to check in.
Okay.
And then most of the time, we as individuals have a sense like something is wrong. But every once in a while, someone is in a state of mind where they're sort of unable to see that something is wrong in and of it themselves. And so if the other people around you, and it's like people that you trust and who love you, are saying, look, something is not right. You are not yourself. Something is completely different. That can also be a sign. Okay, it's time to just go in and see what's going on.
Because now I'll be the first to tell you that I am one who has sought out therapy and honestly could
Me too.
probably use a check-in with a therapist, with all that's going on in the world. But sometimes I have had it where things just get so rough where I actually start to feel physical pain in my body. And it's not necessarily something that can be medicated away or anything like that. I'll even go get checked out and everything's fine. Is it possible for stress to actually do physical harm to our bodies?
Absolutely. And in fact, for Black folks in particular,
Mm-hmm.
we are much more likely to display those physical symptoms first before we realize what's happening at the cognitive or
Really?
emotional level.
Why do they say why that is, or is that
So there are a
just
couple of factors. One
okay?
of them is that mental health stigma is so rampant in our communities
Mm-hmm.
that we have language for physical symptoms in a way that we don't have language for mental or emotional symptoms.
Mm.
The other is that, so the way you phrase your question, is it possible that stress could lead to some of those physical symptoms? Is actually what happens to everybody. So the way I tell my students is like, if you're experiencing a stressor, your body responds to every single stressor as if you're about to fight a bear. It could be a physical
Oh.
stressor, it could
Mm-hmm.
be an emotional stressor, it could be a conflict with a partner, it could be a work deadline. Your body cannot distinguish between different types of stress. It could be racism and race related violence.
Mm.
Your body responds to all of that myriad of stressors as if you're about to engage in a physical altercation, basically. And so
Wow.
there's a chemical that gets secreted when we're under stress called cortisol. You've probably heard of this
Mm-hmm. I
chemical.
have heard of cortisol.
Cortisol is really, really helpful if you need to jump from a burning building, run
Okay.
from a bear, fight someone, lift a car off of a child. It's
Mm-hmm.
very, very helpful. You can see better than usual. You're better at using and managing the flow of oxygen. You're faster, you're stronger temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
So when we engage in that physical action, it burns off the cortisol and we return to baseline. Here's the kicker.
Mm.
Most of the stressors that we have are
Mm-hmm.
not bears and fires. They're interpersonal
Mm.
stressors. But
Mm.
our body is constantly preparing for action because all this cortisol is getting released. And so the
Wow.
same chemical that in the short term makes you super powerful,
Mm-hmm.
in the long term gradually breaks down all the systems in your body. And so what we now know is that exposure to prolonged stress makes us more susceptible to stomach pains, backaches, headaches, sleep problems, weight gain, cardiovascular issues, high blood pressure, all of these kinds of things. And one of the reasons Black folks are more susceptible to those physical symptoms
Mm-hmm.
is because we're more susceptible to chronic stress,
Mm.
race related stress being one of the main ones of those, right? Like when I have somebody come in for an intake for a first
Mm-hmm.
appointment, I always ask them when's the last time they had a physical,
Mm.
because our bodies and our minds are connected. And so if they have lots of unexplained physical symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
what that says to me is one of two things: unresolved trauma or chronic stress, maybe both.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. So it's so important that we keep our minds in a place of peace, that we take care of our bodies in a way so that we don't get stressed out. Life is already stressful enough, honestly, not just for Black folks, for everybody.
For
But
everybody, yeah.
of course, there's a, a layer that, we won't, I won't want to get into the weeds of the racism and all of that right now. But we have to be intentional about what the thoughts that we're thinking and the things that we're watching, and even to the
And how we care for our bodies, right? Because
I was
one of the ways we
sleep.
break down that cortisol
Mm-hmm.
is rest,
Mm-hmm.
exercise, meditative spaces, right? We have to it's almost like the way I describe it to my clients is like, imagine stress and anxiety and trauma like there's an alarm going off. But sometimes it's a false alarm. Like sometimes we're anxious about something that isn't real or isn't as big as we think it is, but we can't think clearly and we can't make good decisions until we turn the alarm off. And we have to turn the alarm off by calming our bodies, because we can't think our way out of something that it might be irrational or unreasonable. We just can't, right? And so the language I use is like, tell your body to convince your mind that it's a false alarm. And that means calming our bodies down. Now, the other piece is that sometimes it's not a false alarm, right? Sometimes it is a real danger. And then the work is, how do I find a place where I can feel safe and embrace safety if in fact I am dealing with a situation where I'm in danger? So that's a short version, of course.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's actually really, really good advice. That's really good advice. Yeah, wow. So if we're talking about, telling our bodies to tell our minds to calm ourselves down, or tell our minds to tell our body. Okay.
No, tell your body. You got it right the first time.
Oh, okay.
Tell your body to tell your
mind to calm yourself
exactly.
down. That is so interesting. So interesting. And does it take work to get your body to get in line with that?
It does. One of the most basic strategies we can use is deep breathing. There's this is like a Psych 101 class. I don't know if this is what you wanted, but so there's a film in the abdomen called the diaphragm. You've probably heard of the diaphragm.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the diaphragm is, think of it like a barrier between the torso and the gut.
Okay.
The way your nervous system is organized, if the diaphragm is engaged, your parasympathetic nervous system activates. So remember I talked about the stress response, fighting the bear, cortisol, right?
This bear isn't Winnie the Pooh, right? This bear isn't Winnie the Pooh.
Barrier, like a boundary. So when cortisol gets released, the sympathetic nervous system sends the body into action, right? That's the reason we have the vision, the increased heart rate, all those kinds of things.
Okay.
Okay. So when you feel anxious, irritable, jittery, you have what we call sympathetic nervous system activation. The other part of the nervous system is called the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
That's the part of your nervous system that calms you down.
Okay.
And so when the diaphragm is engaged, it sends a message to the parasympathetic nervous system to calm the body down. So deep breathing works to engage the diaphragm.
Okay.
Tell your body to tell your mind
to calm
down. Exactly. Okay. See how that works?
Yeah.
One of the basic skills for managing anxiety and stress is actually deep breathing.
Okay.
And it's deeper breathing than what most of us are used to doing. Unless you're an athlete or a singer, you might have to practice deep breathing. But all of us engage in deep breathing when we're laying on our backs, like preparing for sleep. It's one of the reasons that we fall asleep, because when you're laying on your back, you have to breathe using your diaphragm. So your diaphragm is engaged, sends a message to the parasympathetic nervous system, you are safe, you can be calm. And your brain takes that message in and says, okay, time to go to sleep.
That is so interesting. So if we just lie flat on our back, we won't even really have to work at it.
You don't have to try. You can do it while you're sitting up, but you have to practice it.
Yes,
but
you do.
What I tell people is, when you start, lay flat on your back and put your hand on your belly button. Inhale, you will actually feel your belly expand. That's how you know you're engaging in diaphragmatic breathing.
That's wild.
When you're sitting, the metaphor I like to use is like, imagine your belly is a balloon and you're trying to fill it up with air as much as you can and then release all the air. So as long as your diaphragm is engaged, it'll be a relaxing breath and you calm your body.
That is so amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like our bodies just kind of have this natural response in it if we just kind of figure out a way to tell our minds, to tell our bodies to calm down.
Tell your body to tell
Heck
your
on it.
mind to calm down.
Tell your
But you
body
know
to tell
why
your
it's
mind.
hard? You know why
What?
it's hard? Because we're not used to seeking wisdom from the body first. We
Mm.
are a very like rational
Uh-huh.
thinking people,
Yeah.
and our preference is to think our way out of things. Um,
Mm.
but sometimes we can't think our way out of it. And frankly, our bodies are more efficient and better at maintaining equilibrium than our minds are.
That's wild.
Yeah, bodies are organized in a way to maintain equilibrium, right? I mean, think about like all the different interacting systems that are in the body
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
how for many of us without any intervention,
Uh-huh.
they just do what they're supposed to do.
This is very true. This is fair. It kind of makes me think of like when people say it's better to teach a baby to swim when they're like
Oh yeah,
an infant because the body knows that what the body needs to do to keep the baby safe. Whereas
yeah,
when you're adult, this is fully kicked in and you're like, that's so interesting. So
exactly. And so
interesting.
it's not to say that our thought processes don't matter. Of course they do.
Right, right.
But for me, a big part of the therapy process is leaning on the wisdom and power of the body to help our minds come to a place of clarity.
So it sounds like if I need to get a couple extra hours of sleep on the weekend, I need to listen to my body and let my body get that sleep and not feel
Yes.
guilty when I get up.
Yes. Because you know what? You'll be able to tell if you need sleep because you won't be able to think as clearly.
Well, I've been sleep deprived for a long time. Anyway,
Hmm.
so that is so fascinating, and it makes me just kind
Hmm.
of like think. I think I need to just kind of take some time and listen to what my body needs, because the body does
Absolutely.
tell you what it needs. It's just a lot of times we don't want to listen to it because we have other things that we want to do and other places
Yeah.
we have to be, and
Yeah.
that's so amazing. And so if we just listen to that, it sounds like half of that is, no, maybe not half, but that's a large part of what therapy really is all about, listening to your body.
Yeah. And if you think about back to that, the definition of mental health that I provided,
Mm-hmm.
the body gives us information about all those different things, right? So if I'm with a person in a room, do I feel safe or unsafe? Like in my gut, do I feel good with this person or not? That's information from the body.
It
If I look
is.
in the mirror, do I feel happy or sad or
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed or frustrated? That's information from the body about my self concept,
Wow.
right? And
Yeah.
so the body is one of the primary tools that we have to understand our experiences. And as I was saying earlier, particularly with Black folks, because there's so much mental health stigma in our communities,
Mm-hmm.
and because, frankly, for much of our existence in this country in particular, we didn't have time or space to talk about our feelings.
Mm-mm.
Sometimes our bodies will tell us before our minds even know what's going on.
Mm.
And so we have to pay attention to it.
Mm.
Your story of I have this unexplained pain and I've gone to the doctor and they can't figure it out is so typical of some of the people who come to my practice, and they're Black folks. We don't give ourselves permission to feel our feelings. And so if the pathway is through the body, then let's take it because the body is wise.
Mm. That is so wonderful. And even, and I won't go, I'm not going to go on this, but go too far down this rabbit hole. But even when we do talk about what we're feeling, whether it be in the company of our own folk or of other people, our feelings are often discredited, even if we're honest
Absolutely.
about what we're feeling.
Absolutely.
You don't get to feel this way because, oh, that's just not how it is. That's not
Mm-hmm.
true. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
just a whole nother layer of why we don't even really talk about our feelings because we don't even know if anybody will take it seriously.
Right. And for me, that's a part of the reason why therapy is such a sacred, excuse me, why it's such a sacred space
Mm-hmm.
is because for that hour, you and this other person have committed together to honoring and understanding your feelings
Mm.
in a way that you probably don't get anywhere else in your life. Like most people, don't ever get an hour in their life where there's another person who is totally divested from their own agenda and is just committed to you being the best version of you.
Mm.
that is a transformative experience.
It is.
And that's what therapy is, to be seen and understood and encouraged in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Even with people who love us, they still have their own agendas, they still have
They
their
do.
own needs.
They do.
And that's okay. It's not bad.
It
It's
is.
just relationships,
And it's
right?
just the realness of it.
Relationships are reciprocal. But in
Exactly.
therapy, it's not a reciprocal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Both people there are invested in you. And
Mm.
that's a really, really powerful experience that I think everyone should have. Take it with a grain of salt because I'm a therapist, but I also wouldn't be a therapist if I didn't really believe in the process.
Wow. Wow. And I think this is also a great segue to kind of go into my next question of how we dismantle the shame that is
Mm-hmm.
around mental health. And I think part of it is having discussions like this. But if I can, if you'll allow me to do a shameless plug for your book, what some of you may not know is that Dr. Brown is also a published author, and she has a wonderful book titled "Making Space at the Well." It's mental health and mental health in the church, but if I may be so bold as to say that even though in this book we're talking about making mental health a church-friendly thing, I think it's also safe to say that this could also be applied to our own daily lives about
For
how we
sure.
can approach the idea of mental health and welcome the aspect of mental health and ways we can connect to, expound upon getting what we need for our own mental health.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think
Yeah.
the book is really about recognizing that, as I said at the beginning, all of us have mental health.
Yes.
All of us need to attend to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do, our relationships are better, our communities are better, we grow as people if we're
Mm-hmm.
able to make space for those conversations and to have them authentically.
Yeah.
I am a firm believer that I tell my students, whenever you're talking about like relationships or organizations, bad behavior is the result of an unmet need, right? And so a lot of the like
Mm.
disruptive, problematic behaviors that we see in our relationships and in our communities,
Mm-hmm.
I am a firm believer, boil down to not necessarily a mental illness, but to some mental health need that hasn't been addressed appropriately. And
Mm.
that when we respond to that need, people don't have to act out because they're getting what they need, right?
Right.
But we've got to think about other ways to help them meet their goals. And so that's a big piece of what therapy is. But it's also, I think, a big piece of what we can accomplish if we're really committed to being in relationship with people and sticking with them and working to know them and see them in
Mm-hmm.
meaningful ways.
That is so interesting because so quickly it's easy to say, oh, she's just a terrible person, or he's just like that. You just get used to it. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is that their behavior does actually go back to something that
Sure.
happened maybe in their childhood or even happened earlier this morning. That there is something that is there, and I think it kind of gives people even more humanity if we do
Mm-hmm.
approach them that way. That's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So we are all involved in this quarantine situation right now. And so what are some tips and tricks that you can give us to kind of help keep ourselves from going off on the deep end while we are sequestered in our homes?
So the first thing is take care of your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sleep, nutrition, exercise. They're incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the consequences of times like these is we are bombarded with stressors all the
Yeah.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already talked about what stress does to the body, right? So we
Exactly.
have to try to counteract that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is I've just been telling people like it's okay not to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to extend grace to ourselves and others.
Yeah.
Like what I'm typically, you asked me before we started recording if I'm a type A person, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
totally am. But there are some parts of that process that I've had to relinquish in this
Mm-hmm.
time
Mm-hmm.
because my capacity just isn't what it normally is, right? And I
Yeah.
can't do all the things that I'm used to doing. So I have a
Mm-hmm.
choice point there around beating myself up for not being productive in the way I think I should,
Mm-hmm.
or recognizing that because we're all in this time of intense stress, I
Mm-hmm.
am capable of less. And so I need to manage my expectations. And so if I'm going to do that for myself, I also need to commit to doing that for other people as well. So grace abounds. um, and the final piece, I think, is to really get creative in the ways we connect with the people we love, but
For sure.
also just in providing opportunities for play and joy. Like this is a really stressful time. Like in the past 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
a global pandemic, recording upon recording of Black people being killed in the street, uprising in response to that. Like it's a stressful time to be alive. And I'm
It
sure
is.
it's not the most stressful that it's ever been.
It's
But
pretty
for
bad
many of us
though.
who are living, it's
Yeah,
pretty bad. And
it's
we've probably
bad.
never experienced anything this bad before, right?
And pray we don't again.
Right. And so when I acknowledge all of that,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that, as my grandmother would say, I'm in a little bit of my right mind
Listen here.
is amazing.
Yes.
And so I'm just going to do my best. And sometimes that means I feel really productive and wonderful. And sometimes that means my big accomplishment is getting out of the bed and taking a shower and making sure the people in my house have been fed, right? But because of that reality,
Mm-hmm.
I need moments to unplug and unwind.
Mm.
And for me, that's been doing a puzzle or going outside on a sunny day and blowing bubbles with my son, like
I love
something
that. Mm-hmm.
totally playful,
Yeah.
because to have moments of joy in periods like this is
Mm.
one of the ways that we resist. It's
Mm.
one of the ways that we fight back against a world that sometimes feels like it's trying to take us out.
Yes.
And it's one of the ways we maintain our health, right? By keep keeping those moments of joy and play. So I think
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like for you, it's really important to nurture it and to plan for it and to commit to it as
Mm.
much as you commit to your work or whatever else.
Yeah, that's so good because I have even had days myself, just to reiterate your point, where I was like, there are some days I'm just knocking them down, just boom, 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 boom. And then, like, for the next 2 days, the victory is getting out of bed, making sure I showered, and put on deodorant. And
Mm-hmm.
deodorant has been a major thing, but like, I don't normally walk around without deodorant. I need you to know this. I've been
It's good to
complimented
know.
for how wonderful I smell. So I don't want any sass. But it's just being, in the state that we're in right now, sometimes you forget the basics.
It's hard.
It
It's
is.
hard.
It
And
is.
I think it's important for us to just acknowledge this is hard and I'm
Yeah.
doing my absolute best.
Yeah.
And I've had work related conversations where I've just been like, I'm sorry, I cannot, that thing that was expected of me is not going
Mhm.
to happen. And
Wow.
here's my commitment to how I can get it done in a time that makes sense for me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sacrifice my mental health for anybody. I'm just
Mhm.
not. And if I don't have it to
Mhm.
give, then I simply don't have it to give. So that's been a
Mhm.
big adjustment for me because I'm not, I'm typically the like grind through, get it done.
Yeah.
And I just don't have it sometimes. And
I
that's
get
been
it.
okay. It's actually been a blessing for me because I realized that I don't have to go back to that manic way of doing things if I
Mhm.
if that's not what God is calling me to.
And it's so liberating to be in that
Mm-hmm.
place. And also, I've been learning how to establish boundaries. Who would have thought
Mm-hmm.
that being trapped in your house, you learn how to set boundaries? But I
Mm-hmm.
have been. And I'm not going here. I'm not doing that. I'm not. And when coronavirus lifts, because it will lift, you can still keep that in place. You know, so I just think it's so great that even though being inside has some of its you know, things that we don't like, it also has afforded us some interesting opportunities as well. Said all that to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but also figuring out how I can be of service in my own way, and still
Sure.
maintaining my own principles and not wavering in that. And I think that's good. I think that's good. Just a few other quick things. Are there any resources that you know of that we can tap other than your wonderful book here? We just wanted to
Sure.
plug that again. What other websites we can go to, or
Oh, there's a great website that I like to send people to called mentalhealthamerica.net.
okay.
And it's a mental health resource that really focuses specifically on people of color.
Okay.
It has stats, it has resources, information about not only different disorders, but like screening instruments and just all kinds of resources. So I really love Mental Health America.
Okay.
Um, I'm trying to think what other, oh, I really like meditation apps and those kinds of things.
Mm,
So the two that I refer people to most often are Liberate, which is a meditation app specifically for people of color,
mm-hmm.
and then calm.com, which is one that's more generalized.
Yeah.
And they both have like a free version and a paid version, and
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of different kinds of meditations. So I
Okay.
really tend to find those kinds of things helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they're helpful for managing like a wide variety of mental health stuff.
Okay. Perfect.
So those are probably the things that I recommend most often.
Gotcha. And if I can throw one more in there, there's one called Insight Timer that I have found to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
They have guided meditations from people of all different backgrounds, which is actually really nice too. And they have guided and not guided meditations. So that as well. And I'll also have links and list the apps below the below the video, so you can explore
Mm-hmm.
it, so that viewers can explore them on at their leisure. And I just have I think we've already covered this, um, but I do kind of want to go back to it in referencing your book as well. Is it okay to have Jesus and a therapist? Like, how do we, because I know there are some people out there, because there are people of faith that are watching this, Christian
Mm-hmm.
faith, and people maybe of different religions, Baha'i, Islam, the Muslim faith,
Mm-hmm.
Sikhs, whatever you may be. Is it okay to have religion and a therapist? And
Absolutely.
if you go to a therapist, does it mean that you're not religious, or your faith isn't deep enough?
Right. So I personally think that whatever our faith system is, so, we both identify as Christians, so we'll kind of talk through that lens for now.
Mhm.
But for
Mhm.
me, I, I believe that God can operate in a multitude of ways. And so
Mhm.
God can also operate through my therapist. God can
Mhm.
also operate through that antidepressant medication, right? I'm a
Mhm.
firm believer. I do think it's important for us to find a therapist who can help us to integrate and understand how those cultural beliefs shape us so we
Mhm.
don't have to choose, right? Because
Mhm.
I think that's a part of the concern. People feel
Mhm.
like, well, if I go to this therapist, I'll have to leave my faith at the door. And if you feel that way, it's just not a good fit between you and that therapist,
Yeah.
right? So I do think
Yeah.
it's important for us to find people who can help us to integrate those things. And frankly, I think one of the reasons why I get so many calls is because people know they don't have, like I have therapy clients that part of their homework is going to Bible study, literally,
Wow.
because if you have if you have a therapeutic goal
Mhm.
around building relationships, you
Mhm.
can't build relationships if you're sitting at home not engaging with people, right?
This
And
is
so
very
let's talk
true.
about some particular ways that you can engage, right? And so I think
Mhm.
it's just about finding a good fit
Mhm.
and finding someone who at the least understands. We often think that a therapist has to be like matched to us in all these different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be helpful, but it's actually more important that the therapist understands and can help you to navigate those cultural identities than it is that they match all your identities, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, you absolutely can, but it's important, I think, to find one where you don't feel like you have to choose. And we are out here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it just kind of because there's fear that surrounds therapy. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the pushback and the negative feelings that people have are really based in fear.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say I am going to come to you. When I come to you, are you going to pull out electrodes and stick them to my head and then give me a few shocks and then talk to me? Or am I you're going to give me a lobotomy? Like, what's going to happen when I come into your office?
Sure. So it certainly depends on the type of professional you go to, right? But for most of us doing outpatient therapy, nobody's going to pull out electrodes the first
Thank
session,
you. That's what I
unless
really, okay. All right.
unless you go to a neuropsychologist, right, or a sleep specialist, something like that. But for most of us in outpatient therapy,
Mm-hmm.
that first session is a conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
all the sessions are conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Where the goal of the first session is to get a sense of sort of what your needs are, what you'd like to get out of therapy, and if the client and the therapist will be a good fit.
Okay.
So the first session typically kind of feels like an interview.
Okay.
You're asked a lot of questions, you're asked about your symptoms, you're often asked a timeline for those symptoms, and you're asked what kinds of things would you like to get out of this process, right? What are your
Mm-hmm.
goals?
Mm-hmm.
I do, I try to warn people like it's, you shouldn't necessarily expect that after that first session, you'll like feel great and feel like all your problems are solved.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not really doing much work in that first session
Mm-hmm.
except to try to get to know each other and try to get a sense of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the hope is that by the end of that first session, your therapist will have a sense of, okay, here's what seem to be the major issues going on.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how I believe I can be helpful to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you and that person can have a conversation about whether you'd like to move forward. It's
Mm-hmm.
also a chance for you as the client to ask any questions you have. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to ask as many questions as you need to ask
Mm-hmm.
to feel comfortable with that person and to feel like, okay, this is somebody I can really be honest and authentic with and really build a working relationship with. It's important to have a sense that your therapist cares about you, wants the best for you, and is on your side, right? And so it's really just about building that sense of trust.
Okay. Okay. And I've had I've had two therapists in my life.
Mhm.
And I went to the first therapist I went to on two, when I say occasions, I mean it was a series of years that I was in. So the first set of
So we call those
years,
like treatment episodes.
sure, there we go. So the
Mm-hmm.
first treatment episode, I'll be honest that I was not as honest with her as I should have been. Um, because when I was younger and I didn't really get how amazing therapy could be. So, and that went on for a few years. But the second time around, the second treatment episode, I was completely honest about everything I was feeling and how I was. And and then the other therapist I went to, I just kind of started going in on everything. And the second treatment episode and the current therapist I have now, because I've been so cutthroat honest with them, I've gotten so much more out of the therapy
Mm-hmm.
versus me telling them what I want them to know instead of the honest, real, raw um, things that they need. And of course, it took me time to get comfortable with these people. Of course, it took me time to um, feel safe. Um, and really, this is just something to kind of help people through some of the nervousness. It helps a lot just to be honest in these sessions that, you know, the therapist is bound by contracts and all kinds of things. And I'm sure you can speak
Mm-hmm.
to that because I can't. I don't know what kind of certifications we should be looking for in a therapist to avoid like a quack doctor versus somebody who's legit. I can tell you for sure she's the real deal. Um, but you know,
I am.
yeah, she is.
So here's the thing. There's a couple of credentials that you're looking for. One is a graduate degree, right? It could be a master's or a doctorate.
Okay.
Um, the other is a license. So those are two separate things. One is a degree, one is a license.
Okay.
If you're using insurance, you need a person who's licensed and then who has a contract with your insurance company.
Gotcha.
And your insurance can tell you whether that person is or not. So in the state of Virginia, there's licensed professional counselors, LPC, licensed clinical social worker, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical psychologist. I think those are I don't think we have other licensure levels. There are
Okay.
other kinds of certifications that people might have, like you could
Right.
have a trauma certification or substance abuse certification, but you need the license, and then any certification is kind of an add-on.
Gotcha.
So you could have somebody who's licensed and who's a totally competent therapist,
Right.
but there's a different conversation about whether they would be a good fit for you.
Right. Okay.
So I always tell people, like, in some ways, finding a therapist is kind of like dating, in
It
that
is.
you have to find somebody who's a good fit. There could be somebody who's like a perfectly good person, but just maybe isn't a good fit for you, and that's okay. Keep trying. And so that's why I said I think it's important to, if you have questions, to get all those questions answered. And one of the things I actually do when I have a new client is to ask them if they've had previous therapy experiences before and what worked and what didn't work. Because that will help me to know, like, and I'm honest with people, you know, if I think I'm not going to be a good fit for some reason or another, I let people know that, because I also don't want to waste people's time.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Now, I'm not going to kick anybody out of therapy, of course. If you want to come, you can come, and I'll work to help you to get your needs met. But I'll also be honest with people, for potentially, like, let's say it's out of my scope of practice, something that I don't feel particularly skilled at, or else I just think maybe it wouldn't be a good fit because the person needs or wants something that I don't really do. You know, I think you have to keep looking, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, but it's worth it, because you do want that person that you can sit down and start talking and feel like you can be totally authentic with.
Yeah.
And so the benefit you get from being able to engage in that way is worth the work it can take to find somebody who's a good fit for you.
Agreed. 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 And even if you've been to therapy before, you'll find that sometimes, like I learned myself, is that sometimes the needs that you had before in the previous therapy episode, you may not have those needs at this point.
Yeah.
And it could be something
Very
completely different. So yeah, this is your old therapist, but she's not really providing you what you need right now. It may be time to go shopping. And that was one of the major takeaways for me in changing therapists as well. Not to mention she was
I've
hired,
changed therapists
but
too. Yeah. And
yes,
that's okay.
yeah,
They were both good for what they were good for. But
exactly,
as we grow and develop, we have different needs, and that's okay.
absolutely. Because my therapist, a little bit just borderline, she beats me up a little bit, and honestly, I appreciate her for it. I do. So yeah, but yeah, therapy is a wonderful thing. And I am open and honest about the fact that I've been to therapy and that it's helpful, and that I also may need to check in eventually with a therapist just to have that one-on-one conversation. And my hope is that this conversation helps people to see that therapy is a beneficial, and therapists are around because we need them, and because they're here to help, and even therapists have therapists. So
Absolutely.
a good
They
therapist
should.
has a therapist.
Absolutely. My therapist is amazing, and she actually works with a lot of other therapists, and
Oh,
so
nice.
one of the things we've talked about in this period is, like, all of us really need that additional support, because therapists are dealing with our own stuff just as people. And then we're working to provide support to all of our clients who are coming in. It's a lot. It's a really challenging time to be in the mental health profession. And so we need that additional support so we can continue to be effective at our jobs.
Wow.
And one of the ways we combat stigma is just by talking about it, right?
Yes. Yes.
Therapy is not just for quote unquote crazy people, which, that's a
Mm-mm.
word that we can
It's
remove from our
dismissive.
vocabulary.
It's dismissive.
Right. And not accurate. And,
No. No.
but anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it's a stigmatizing word, right? But it's
Yes.
not even just for people who have a diagnosed mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
We can all benefit from therapy. And it is a way to either regain mental stability or maintain it. And both of those are noble goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And worthwhile goals. So
Absolutely.
I encourage
Absolutely.
everybody out there, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, go check in. If you've never had a therapist, it's time to get one. And they're good people. Just give them a try. And just I I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
Now, I was just going to say two websites that I think are great if you're searching for a therapist.
Yes. Hang
I'll
on
put
one
them in the
second.
chat for you.
Oh, perfect.
Um,
Cool. Yes.
yeah, is therapyforblackgirls.com
Okay.
or therapyforblackmen.org.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
They are excellent resources
Mm-hmm.
to just kind of get connected with people in your area. Now, they certainly aren't the only resources. I get a lot of referrals by word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, if they had a good experience, if you know somebody who's been to therapy and they really like it, ask
Mm-hmm.
them who their therapist is, because I
Gotcha.
think word of mouth matters. Another resource that can be helpful, it's not as culturally specific, but it's more robust in terms of the search options, is
Mm-hmm.
psychologytoday.com.
Ah, okay. Yes.
And on any of those websites, you can search by zip code, by insurance, by gender of the provider, by specialty area. So there are lots of
Perfect.
options.
There are, and I'm actually, and just to let the listeners and viewers know, I'm going to have links to all of these websites underneath the video, so you can just click and go
Mm-hmm.
once you finish the podcast, listening to the podcast, or watching. Um, this has just been such a worthwhile discussion, and it's honestly given me some perspective, and kind of let myself off the hook a little bit with
Mm-hmm.
all that's going on in the world around us, be it the racial stuff, be it the COVID stuff, be it the governmental stuff, be it anything that's going on in the world around us, and celebrate the little victories, because
Absolutely.
sometimes a shower is a big win.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for sharing with us today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. So if you will play a little game with me, I do this with all my guests, where we do the pivot
Okay.
questionnaire, which for those who may not know, James Lipton used to do this at the end of the show of his show, inside the actor studio, where he would ask the guests questions before he would leave them with the students. There are no students here to leave you with, but I just think it's a fun way to get to know some random things about you, and then also just kind of give tribute to him, who was an influence in my life as well. So, to start off, here we go. What is your favorite word?
Idiosyncrasy.
Okay. All right. And what is your least favorite word?
Awkward. I don't like the way it's spelled. Awkward has
Okay.
an awkward spelling.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Um, Laughter.
What turns you off?
Hmm. Um, what turns me off? Um, this is gonna sound odd coming from a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
but complaining. What I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is like complaining without an intention. Like I don't mean venting, but
Mm-hmm.
like if people are just like invested in being negative for the sake of being negative
Gotcha.
and aren't invested in like doing something with the negative energy,
Gotcha.
that's frustrating for me.
Understood. What is your favorite curse word?
This is tricky. They're all so useful.
They are.
Um, Probably damn.
Okay.
It's so simple, so versatile.
And somebody has a joke out there that's like, Black people can say damn in several different ways, and you know what all of them mean.
Absolutely. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
They are. You're like, damn. Like it says two completely different things. It's the same word. I get it. What sound or noise do you love?
Laughter, I guess.
And
or food cooking.
Okay.
You know, like a pot on the stove.
I gotcha.
It's a good sound.
What sound or noise do you hate?
People chewing their food.
You know that's a condition, right?
I know. I probably have it. People smacking.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would either be a Spanish teacher or a photographer.
Are you fluent?
I used to be. It's probably somewhere in the back of my mind. I don't use it as much, but
it is. Yeah. I found, because I was borderline fluent in high school, and then I went and got a theater internship. Kind of regret that. But it was a good internship though. But when I moved to LA for a little while, the Spanish actually started to come back. So
oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If I went to a Spanish speaking country for a couple of weeks, it would all be there. It usually happens when I travel to a Spanish speaking country. I'm like, oh, I can still speak Spanish.
Yeah.
But I just don't use it enough when I'm here.
Right, exactly. What profession would you not like to do?
An accountant.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I admire them. Their work is important.
Yeah.
I just think I would be miserable.
The sheer amount of numbers would just overwhelm me, and I don't want to be responsible if $1 million gets lost.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you believe heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You did what I asked you to do.
I love it.
Love
it. Friends and liberators all around the world, this has been Dr. Jessica Young Brown. And if you could be so kind, we have like maybe 2 minutes. Would you be willing to lead us in an exercise that we can do to calm ourselves down?
Oh yeah, let's do a belly breath. Okay. So kind of start with getting into a comfortable position. If you're sitting, try to get as comfortable as possible. Allow your feet to rest on the floor.
Okay.
And just imagine that your belly is a big balloon.
Okay.
That you are going to use your breath to fill up.
Okay.
And so take a minute to just relax your body. And then I want you to do a big, deep inhale through your nose. And inhale for a count of 4.
Okay.
Okay, so inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I want you to hold that breath in your belly for a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and allow that air to come out in a whoosh through your mouth for a count of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is my favorite breathing exercise. You can do it as many times as you need to. And again, it just engages that diaphragm and tells your body to tell your mind to calm.
So I'm going to do some of that later on today because, it's surprisingly hard. 4, 7, 8. It's surprisingly hard though. It's breathing. I breathe, but that's a different type of breathing.
It's more intentional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is switching from an automatic process to an intentional process. And the other
Mm-hmm.
thing is we're not used to really holding our breath. That's the part. Usually the hold for 7 is the hard part, right?
It's a little scary even.
hmm So if you feel like you're going to pass out, go ahead and breathe, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But most of us can hold for 7 counts.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it creates this intentionality of the inhale and the exhale. And
Gotcha.
so I recommend doing it like 4 or 5 times in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And almost inevitably, people feel calmer afterwards. Like something
Mm.
just as simple as inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8,
Mm-hmm.
5 times. You feel totally different.
Because I'll admit, after that one time, I felt different. I really wasn't really ready to let it
hmm
go. So, yeah,
hmm
I will definitely 4, 7, and 8 breath. That's
4,
good
7,
stuff.
8.
4,
Easy
7, 8.
peasy.
Love it. Dr. Jessica Young Brown, you are wonderful. And this has been such a therapeutic and informative session. I will post the links to all of the websites that she gave us below. And it has just been a joy to share with you today. Thank you so much for
Thank
giving us
you.
all of your wonderful self. I appreciate you and all that you brought and shared with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, this has been another episode of Interesting People featuring Dr. Jessica Young Brown. And it has been my joy to share with you today. Please go out and take care of yourselves. Get some rest, get some water, exercise. Take care of yourselves because you are worth it. So I will see you guys next week. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you have a wonderful day.